I don't know how confident they really are. I'm pretty sure that Netanyahu knows what this will lead to, but he's a desperate person. He wants to remain in power. I think the elections in the Israeli regime are maybe a week before the elections in the United States. So we have about 2.5 months left till their elections, and he wants to look. He'll do anything to remain in power. These could be threats just to increase confidence among the population, which clearly believes that they lost the war. We know from polls that I think roughly 90% of the Israeli population believes that they lost the war against Iran. So perhaps he wants to strengthen morale, boost morale. Perhaps this is an attempt to intimidate so that the regime in the United States could gain concessions. I don't know. I have no idea, but perhaps it's also being said to push the United States towards attacking Iran. Going back to what the U.S. Secretary of State said at the beginning of the war, that the Israelis were going to attack, so we decided to attack too. I think that's more or less what he said.
Yeah, and well, here's the poll that you're referring to. 90%, 2% of Israelis believe Iran emerged as the winner after this war, and this was back during the original signing of the Memorandum of Understanding back in June. So, yeah, not a lot of morale on the Israeli side, at least on the settler side of things around this war. Well, speaking of Saudi Arabia, Professor Marandi, what do you make of the latest round of strikes and in this counter siege by Yemen? There are incredible reports right now of Yemen not only hitting Aramco again in Jazan, their oil refinery, but also now hitting gas, the Saudi Aramco Berry gas plant in Al Jubail, Saudi Arabia. So major escalations there, and no sign that Saudi Arabia is tapping out just yet. So what do you make of this, especially in light of this so-called Mecca, NATO, whatever the hell it's supposed to be, agreement between the three states? You call them backstabbing states, Saudi Arabia. Well, Pakistan, a little more complex, but Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Pakistan. What do you make of all this?
We know that the Saudis consider Yemen to be their backyard, which is, of course, not something that Yemen accepts. Yemen is an ancient civilization. It is a civilizational state. It's been around far, far before Saudi Arabia ever existed, many times over, many times over. So the Saudis have tried to starve Yemen since 2015 and slaughter them into obedience. They did what they did to Yemen in 2015 with the green light of Obama, not Trump. What they did to Yemen was not dissimilar to what the Israeli regime did to Gaza. And this was one of the great crimes of our time. And the only difference was that the genocidal attacks were carried out in silence. There wasn't much news. They were bombing schools. They were bombing school buses. They were bombing funerals. I think in one funeral they killed like hundreds of people. They starved the population. American ships and other ships in the Red Sea, they would block boats from taking food or medicine into Yemen. I recall one former U.S. Official, or someone affiliated to I think he was military, saying that he was on a ship in the Red Sea and they blocked it. They stopped the boat and it was full of medicine, and the American Navy dumped it into the sea, the medicine, which was destined for Yemen. So that's what they were trying to do. It was, another Gaza. But the only difference was that Yemen, being larger and much more capable, it had the armed forces of Yemen and Ansar Allah were able to fight back and resist. And the Saudis had the same support that they have now. The collective West was supporting them. We all recall what they were doing, and then the region was supporting them. all of these countries, all of the countries in the region, of course, except for Iran, they were supporting Saudi Arabia and the Emirates in carrying out this genocidal war. Of course, a couple of years later, after Saudi Arabia and the Emirates imposed a siege on Qatar, the Doha distanced itself, and so did Erdogan, because he and the Qatari regime are bound to one another. So then later they distanced themselves. In fact, I remember I was on Al Jazeera a couple of times at the beginning of the genocidal war in Yemen, on a show called Inside Story, twice. And then after that, I was no longer invited on Al Jazeera for a very, very long time. Sort of like in Syria. In Syria, it was the same. They stopped inviting me. They banned me for a while. And then after Yemen, it was the same. So everyone was on board with this, with this murderous assault. Well, back then, Yemen was weaker than now. And Saudi Arabia was stronger. And Saudi Arabia was more wealthy. And Saudi Arabia wasn't facing the circumstances that it is facing today. So if any country assists Saudi Arabia in this war, it's not going to make it any better than it was back then. And back then, ultimately, the Saudi regime failed. When Yemen began to develop its own missile industry and its drone industry, they have smart young engineers, very smart and dedicated people. Of course, Iran helped, but the Yemeni, they made it an indigenous industry, and they built their own underground bases, as we saw when the Americans launched their war against Yemen, because Yemen was supporting the people of Gaza, and the Americans failed. So these young men, and perhaps women, I don't know, they began firing at Saudi oil assets, and Saudi Arabia was forced to end the war and accept a ceasefire. But ever since then, they've continued to impose a siege on Yemen. And when an Iranian commercial airline was taking a delegation back from Iran, the delegation that was taking part in the funeral of Ayatollah Khamenei, the martyr, they bombed the airport as the Iranian plane was moving to land, a commercial plane where, with an ordinary crew of men and women. That outraged Iran, and of course, it was an act of war against Yemen. So everyone should be siding with Yemen instead of collaborating with Saudi Arabia. I mean, no country created a coalition with Saudi Arabia over Gaza, over Lebanon, over Syria. I mean, look at Syria right now. They've occupied huge parts of the southern part of the country. Where's the coalition to push back the Israelis there? Or in Lebanon, where the Israeli regime is occupying the south of the country. And as we speak, they're destroying all the forests. They're burning down all the forests in southern Lebanon. They're destroying the villages that go back hundreds of years, and now they're destroying the whole environment, everything. They're turning the southern part of Lebanon into a wasteland. Where's the Saudi coalition over for them? Where's the Saudi coalition for the West Bank? So it's only for the enemies of the United States that these coalitions are built. Must be some coincidence.
Yeah, well, some have remarked, Professor Marandi, that what could be happening right now is some kind of strategy of tension, because you have the United States on the one hand constantly leaking to the media through these anonymous officials that they want to get out of the war, but they only really care about the Strait of Hormuz, and they want to do some kind of basic trade with Iran. And Iran has made it very clear, as has been the case since June and since before June, that the MOU terms and now expanded terms are the ones that Iran will take. And then you have Saudi Arabia, on the other hand, and Israel, all engaging in their own kind of either aggression or both a combination of aggression and, just out and out warmongering, as we see against Yemen. So many people believe that the United States and Donald Trump is trying to talk out of this, but the landscape doesn't really support that. So how do you see
out of what?
taco
Talk
out of
about
the war, taco out of war, and
taco, taco.
yeah, to
Yeah,
taco, yeah, to
I thought
chicken
you said
out.
talk them out of. Okay, sorry
Oh
about that.
no. That's my Boston accent there. Taco out of war. Um, but the landscape again seems to not support this, despite all of the reports. So, how do you see this overall landscape? Because now it does include now Turkey and Pakistan. They're in this so-called Mecca defense pact, but the landscape doesn't support what Iran had said about it, which was, they support independent security alliances and whatnot, and only that can only be positive. But the landscape looks like actually the U.S. is constantly trying to push its vassals and its proxies to, take on more war. What do you make of this?
I don't think. I mean, if you mean this Saudi-led coalition with this pact, I don't think it's all that serious. It's. I mean, Yemen today bombed in retaliation Saudi Arabia, and there hasn't been any response from Turkey. The Turkish Air Force has not bombed Yemen yet or anything like that. So for the moment, I don't think that's really serious. Uh, it's not going to look good. I mean, there's a lot of criticism of what Turkey did in Turkey because of the nature of the Saudi regime and because of the broader regional uh, political and military situation. So I don't see that really as a big issue. Although I do think that the chances for war a new active war assault by the United States is quite possible. I'm not saying it's probable because I don't know, but I do know that people here are taking uh, the situation very seriously, and and of course the United States, as usual, they have their assets based in Saudi Arabia, in the Emirates, in Kuwait, in Bahrain, in Qatar, in Oman, in Jordan. Uh, they have a lot of the radar installations, as I said, were destroyed, although the ones in Turkey continue to function. And then there's the Israeli regime, where and also the assets are stored in in countries outside of the region as well, in for a possible attack. So it's impossible to really say what will happen because Trump is Trump. And even though it may sound reasonable for him to end the war and to just implement the MOU as he promised to do, uh, but that's not how Trump functions, and that's not what the Israeli regime and the Zionist lobby want. So, and as we've discussed this before on multiple occasions, and every day that goes by, the global economic situation deteriorates. It's been moving more slowly than I thought 4 or 5 months ago, but it's still moving in that direction, especially now that the Red Sea is closed to Saudi oil. I mean, the Strait of the Bab el Mandeb Strait is closed, and the Saudis are being attacked in retaliation to their attacks. That has cut their oil exports even further, and the Emirates is not exporting oil either right now. So the situation is worsening rapidly, but more slowly than at least I anticipated two, like 2-3 months ago.